We'll be starting up here in about a little over a minute
Okay.
after the top of the hour. Ted, do you have a slide that talks about the audiovisual controls and stuff or not? Nope. Okay. I'll take care of it.
No, I don't. Sorry. I was on mute.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take care of it then. Okay, we'll give folks about 30 seconds to finish logging in. Got quite a crowd today.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be out in the hazy, smoky day. A lot better this morning than yesterday afternoon.
When did I deal with that recently? I was at a Meadowlands Stadium watching two soccer games, and there was no mention of smoke, but it was smoke. You
Yeah.
couldn't see Manhattan.
Oof, oof.
It was that bad, and it just looked like just dropped. And it was sitting in the stadium itself.
Oh, lovely. Well, let's talk about something nicer and livelier here. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to one of our foundational webinars. You're in for a treat today. We have Ted Green, who's probably more famous for his train sounds than other stuff, but I'd say probably knows the ADA better than almost anybody I know. And he's going to talk to us today about complete streets and the ADA. Um, and just so you know, if you don't know, I'm David Orm with the New York State LTAP Center with the Cornell Local Roads Program, and just make sure you've opened up your chat pod, because that's where we can send you notes. Open up your Q&A, that's where you can send Ted questions. And if you have any issues with your audio visuals, and that's down at the bottom, you can send us a question. And if you have anything else, Ted may even ask you to raise your hand, so be ready for it. Now watch this miracle stuff. My hands are up, and Jody in the background is going to do a few polls so we can figure out who's on the call today.
All right, guys. The first poll is I work for town, county, city, village, state, tribal, private, or the weekend. Answers are coming in. And it looks like no one's for the weekend, but we have some
No,
private,
no.
state,
Got
village.
three of them down there, Jody.
Gotcha. Got them. Yep. All right, next question is my job is. We have a lot coming in of engineers. If you put in none of the above, you can put that in the Q&A. And it looks like admin, highway supers, field crew, board members all across the board.
And 3/4 engineers. Okay.
And last one, years and current position. Few more seconds.
Wow, that's quite a spread there. We even have one person who put in, they've been there less than a month.
Yeah. All right. Ted, I'm taking it back over to you.
Okay, Ted, good luck. I'm going to go dark. We'll be in the background.
Thank you very much, David and Jody. Well, welcome everybody. I would like to welcome everybody to Complete Streets in ADA. We do have a nice diverse group of people. As we mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A box and I'll get to them as it gets along. Sometimes I might park a question because I know I will cover it later, but I will mention that I'll park it. Of course, this becomes a big question. What exactly is complete streets? I know another poll question I would have asked. How many people here are strictly for the PDH credits? Don't answer. I usually know that answer. But that always becomes a thing because we have a lot of people doing complete streets because they are needed to do it to make sure that we can make sure that our roads are usable by all the means of transportation, whether it's people on cars, buses, bicyclists, or pedestrians. But sometimes, though, we also have pedestrians that have disabilities, and that can become a bit of an issue when there's a conflict between the two concepts of complete streets and Americans with disabilities. Don't always work together, so a lot of people forget that you have to look at this as the forest and not the individual trees. By looking at individual trees, it has led to quite a few problems throughout the country. So hopefully, we'll show you where a lot of these issues are, and then you can see some ways to help address them so that you don't have problems if you're doing complete streets project. So what exactly is complete streets? Well, this is the Federal Highway Administration's definition. Complete streets are streets that are designed and operated to enable safe use and support mobility for all users. These include people of all ages and abilities, regardless of whether they're traveling as drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, or on public transportation. So quite a lot of people do it. You can see here we have this, the perfect complete streets scenario in this photo on the screen. That's if you have a lot of room, definitely more likely to happen further west than here. Us being in the oldest part of the country does give us a little challenges because we are constrained by our right of way. But it's still possible that there are places that still do this in New York. That is really nice setup. Heavy traffic though. So what do we always hear about when it comes to complete streets or even about having pedestrian networks as a whole? Well, the biggest thing we have is we have no pedestrians. Well, that may not always be the case, but if you have a situation like this where you see these little pathways along the side of the road, you may not always see pedestrians, but that pathway gives a clear indication you do have pedestrians. So, so people say we don't need sidewalks because nobody walks here, but this gives an indication that you do have a need for pedestrian networks and even possibly bicycle networks. Probably, if you have pedestrians, and especially over long distances, you can also have bicyclists as well. The other thing we hear is this: I would walk here if there were sidewalks. Ever been on that type of situation? There are some roads that you really don't need sidewalks. I grew up on one of those streets. I mean, there was not enough traffic. It was low speed. We actually played in the street, no problem. We also knew to get out of the street if a car came. But, that always becomes a thing. Some people would walk if they can do it. And definitely seen places where their people are walking and it's kind of frightening that they are walking, but it's the only way they can get groceries. And even a long walk that they have to do such situations when they have to go shopping or other place. There are just people who don't have driver's license, don't have the ability to drive anymore. Uh, Lots of different reasons. Can't afford a car. Cars are expensive. A thing to have, not just to buy, but you have to insure them. You also have to pay for maintenance. So here's a question. Hope I don't have the chat box, so I can't use this one. But just think for a moment, and I'll just bring up the question, the answers that always pops up. What's the first
They
thing
can
that?
put them in the Q&A if you want.
Okay, if you put it in the Q&A, it's perfect. Okay. Just put the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear the word disability. You place that as a question. There is slightly more variable than usual, but the big thing that pops up is wheelchair or curb ramps, since they're intertwined together. And that is a big thing when you say the word disability. Most people, especially engineers, that's like how I can tell who the engineers are when they say wheelchair, because that's what we see the most often. We see a lot of people with wheelchairs. We put a lot of emphasis on creating curb ramps for people in wheelchairs. But what happens is it's far more than just people in wheelchairs that have a need for accessibility. Can't do something. That's an interesting one. But mobility as a whole becomes a big issue. Most people, like I say, think of wheelchairs, but wheelchairs are the biggest group of people out there when it comes to there. Somebody just put one blind. Um, that's actually a good thing. It's the first time I've ever seen anybody say limping. That a lot of people realize limping just it becomes a mobility issue. becomes difficult to move around. Steps, including a curb, can become difficult for people to traverse. So lots of different things that we have out there. But it's far more than just people in wheelchairs. Here are the faces of persons with disabilities, particular pedestrians with disabilities. We see a couple people in power wheelchairs, also manual wheelchairs, something we have to take into account. Different needs between them and different concerns between a power wheelchair and a manual wheelchair. If a person has got a strong upper body strength, they definitely prefer manual wheelchairs. They're far more maneuverable. They don't have to worry about the batteries going dead. But hills become an issue for them. Uh, so a lot of people do like the mobility wheelchairs. A mobility wheelchair, power wheelchair and a mobility scooter are actually two different things. Uh, we're actually designing for power wheelchairs and not mobility scooters. Mobility scooters have a turning radius of a limousine, while a power chair can actually spin on a dime. Uh, but when you see the people with disabilities, uh, across the nation, it's 2.4% of people actually have a vision disability. Now, this is to be considered legally blind. In other words, they can't drive. They might have some vision or be completely blind, but things are ultimately blurry. If we included people with glasses, these things, we would probably be pushing 90% of the country. Hearing disabilities, 3.6%. Now, fortunately for us, working with the hearing disabilities generally isn't too much of a challenge when it comes to our public rights of way, because if they have vision, they can see things, and we have things that are very much visual. Ambulatory disabilities, this could be people that just have difficult walking. They might use crutches or canes or walkers. They fall into that category about 6.8% overall. And then we have cognitive disabilities. Now, we have a lot more people out with cognitive disabilities, especially on the autistic spectrum. Something we didn't concern ourselves with years ago, because if somebody was severely autistic, they would have probably been in a home of some sort. But now they're more likely to be out. They're using our public transportation system. They're walking on our streets. And for them, as long as we make things consistent, it works. And that actually helps all pedestrians. The reason we want to make sure everything is consistent and logical, because if something is suddenly weird, they will start wondering, why is this one different, or why is it so strange? And then they might be standing in the middle of the street while they're pondering this decision. So we'd rather have them do that kind of activity on a sidewalk away from the street. So, but that like I said, helps all pedestrians if we make things consistent and well laid out. So things that we'll be talking about for the next about 45 minutes or so or less. We'll talk about curb ramp alignments. We'll talk about decorative crosswalks. That's back in the news again. Painted curb extensions. Those are all over the place, especially if people are using that as an experiment to see if a complete streets initiative will work, because paint's a lot cheaper than concrete. We'll talk about center islands, bike lanes, and protected bike lanes. Those can be very problematic. Shared streets, not too many of those, but they are becoming more popular. People wondering what those are. I'll explain that. And then pedestrian signals. Alignment. Uh, Ideally, we have curb ramps that align straight into the crosswalk. So if you come off a curb ramp, you go straight into the crosswalk and you never actually have to make a turn. That helps people in wheelchairs, because when you make a turn, it just becomes a little more difficult. They lose any momentum. But if you see these types of situations in both of these photos, somebody comes off the curb ramp and they end up in the street. So that photo that you see on the left, somebody's going to go, definitely, they're not even landing in the crosswalks, they're landing in the street. And if they go too far, they go out in the street. So they got cars, bicyclists, they have to worry about them, and they don't have any alignment. The general rule when we're following what's called PROAG, the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guideline, and if you're following NYSLTAP's standard details, we're trying to line everything up so it's a straight line. You can for what's called alterations. An alteration is if you have an existing street and you're just saying you're having to replace your sidewalk or you're actually adding a sidewalk. Adding a sidewalk to an existing street is considered an addition or an alteration. So if you don't have room to do it, then you can put in these diagonal curb ramps, which a lot of people really don't like. Uh, but when you look at both of these photos, do you think they have anything that's preventing them from having them to be straight? When you start looking, there's actually nothing preventing them from going straight across. They actually have good alignment for both cases to go straight across. Uh, so try to avoid these diagonal curb ramps. Why do we do these? Well, it's basically been cost over the years. We just threw any slope surface in, and we thought that was good enough. And generally, we find out it's not necessarily good enough. There are definitely places where this becomes an issue. A lot of places in New York City, you'll definitely get in others, upstate cities as well, where there's so many utilities buried underground, or they even have basements that go under sidewalks. Those become definitely obstacles where you have troubles putting in curb ramps as a whole. I've actually seen that in Manhattan. There was one spot they could not put a curb ramp in because it was right by Grand Central Station. They put a curb ramp in, they would actually drop into the tracks below. It's now closed to vehicle traffic, that particular spot, and it's raised. So it's not an issue anymore. So that's how they solved that one, but it was a very expensive solution. Sure, the owners of the Vanderbilt building actually paid for it. Alignment. So this is what we like to have. A nice straight alignment. You can see on the photo on the left, straight across on both of those particular crosswalks into their crossings. So we see that other diagram. We have good separation. That's a complete streets type diagram. We have good separation of everybody. We have uh, travel lanes. We have curb extensions, or some people call them bulb outs, which gives you actually shorter crossings for pedestrians by bumping it out. It also keeps parked cars away from the crosswalks, which helps with visibility, and you don't have anybody parking in your crosswalk. So a lot of good advantages of that. And we see bus stops. Nice, good setup, and all the curb ramps line up with the crosswalks. So you see how it's all with that one diagram. You see the one crosswalk in yellow. You see that there's like at the bottom what's called a clear space. It's actually fully in the crosswalk. So it's just nice setup when you see uh, items like this. And there's no conflicts between the pedestrians and motor vehicles going in the same direction. Decorative crosswalks. This has definitely been in the news lately. Uh, mm, it's also in the manual and uniform traffic control devices. A lot of people aren't aware of that. If you anything between at least the two white lines, as a minimum, if you have a marked crosswalk, the two white lines is the minimum. So anything between that, you're part of the actual uh, traffic control device itself. So specifically, we're talking about the traffic control device of a marked crosswalk. Now, a lot of times people use this for beautifications. Can be some issues with this. The biggest issue when it comes to, especially with pedestrians that have low vision. Low visions are the people that are very blurry vision, even if they're fully corrected. Now, to them, they can't see our nice, pretty patterns out there. To them, it looks rather confusing. So they don't know if it's a crosswalk or not. And also, it can actually cause them, it's a bit of a psychological item. They see that, might see some blurry pattern. They don't know if it's a smooth surface or a textured surface, and this can actually lead to them tripping. So there definitely been some problems with these. Uh, Also, it's a big problem for people that have to use walkers and crutches because a lot of people are using regular paint. It's not traffic paint. So when that paint gets wet, it gets extremely slippery. So people are slipping and they are suing people for doing this. So there have definitely been a lot of lawsuits throughout the country of people having slips. And if it's an older person, they probably would have like a fractured hip, which is a serious and can lead to more, a life in a wheelchair from that point on because somebody was trying to do beautification. So the key word is don't do this. But actually, a good example is a photo of that upper right photo there where we see this one here, where we see the same pattern in the street and the sidewalk and across the crosswalk. That is actually a crosswalk. It's a mid-block crossing in Seattle, Washington. You can actually see that there is a one-way sign and a pedestrian signal head that's currently in a don't walk phase. That looks confusing to a non to a person with good sight. There's actually these diagonal lines at an intersection. People think it's a diagonal or a crosswalk or even a barn dance situation, and it clearly is not. So that can cause confusion. But this just pattern just continues on, and you don't know where it actually you're at a street edge or street crossing. But there's been definitely been concerns. Well, where does this thing pop up? Well, this has always been popping up, and this is just an example from the NYSDOT itself. They asked a question with federal highways about these decorative colored pavements within the crosswalks. So this one was specifically for Buffalo, and they showed photos what they were going to do. So in this case, they hadn't done it yet. So they compared it to what they're going to do. What they had in this case was yellow, white, beige, green, and gray colored jigsaw puzzle pieces that they fit together around the boundary. Well, on the second half, on the right side there, you'll see it's our official interpretation that the proposed treatment would degrade the contrast of the white crosswalk lines and should not be used. This interpretation applies to any colored pavement or colored marking materials within crosswalks, except subdued colors, paving bricks, paving stones, and material designed to simulate such paving. So there's actually language in the MUTCD, the Manual Uniform Traffic Control Device. So quite a few things that uh, control that. Uh, Uh, s- So where does it actually say you can't do this? Well, ultimately, the thing is the manual uniform traffic control device. Well, you and New York are in that little strange phase at the current time since you've actually formally adopted the 11th edition of the MUTCD. Just a little note, if I have the PDF uh, version of this file. It says Yield says proposed. It's now actually in the 11th edition of MUTCD. It's the only change I've had to made up. Wasn't going to redo everything just for one word, so you can actually remove the word proposed. 11th edition of MUTCD. This is the diagrams from the current MUTCD. So New York State currently uses the 11th edition of MUTCD, but you still can also use the state supplement to the previous one. I don't think there's anything that's truly in conflict, but you can actually find the proposed changes to the state supplement, which is basically adding things because they're adding some new additional advance warning signs. That's the main difference. Oh, sorry, let me back up. I missed a question. Where are the crosswalks in the upper right? In this photo, I'm assuming, or this one? This upper, just cover the upper rights regardless of which slide. This one is actually going to be in Seattle, Washington. I mentioned the upper right one. And this one is actually in Boston. So the upper right one in here in Boston. Both of these are actually considered fine because it's actually brick. The only cautionary one on the upper right photo here is the white brick lines. They cannot be retroreflective. They must be non-reflective white, but that is fine. We have a good example of simulated brick on the bottom photo there. It's bright red between the white lines. The advantage of doing that is that the crosswalk jumps out to not only the pedestrians, but to the motorists. They can see it much more so than just two white lines. There are a few other
Ed,
spots, and yeah,
going back to that one, 2 slides ago,
yeah.
I think the question was, where is the actual crossing in that upper right photo?
The actual crossing is Pine Street in
Well,
Seattle.
no, the actual, where would you walk here as a crossing?
Oh, if you can see my arrow, if not, I can go to
Can't see the arrow.
highlighter. Nope, I don't want highlighter. Laser. Can you see the laser pointer?
Yep, we can see that.
This is the crossing right here.
Oh,
So a few things you can see here. You can see a return curb here and a return curb here. you see a pedestrian signal here and a pedestrian signal here. So this whole width and across is a crosswalk. The reason it's
Okay.
so wide is you can actually drive vehicles on it.
And
That
that's
was,
why it's confusing. Okay, thank
but
you.
it's this pattern, the zigzag pattern, these diagonal lines. There's a diagonal line here. When you get to the intersection, it actually goes diagonally across the intersection. So it looks like a crosswalk line when it's not.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, oh yeah, Boston had one. They found out where I was staying, and it's like, oh, you're going to drive over the crosswalk. They were really proud of some pattern that they have. They said it's so nice, you can't miss it. I drove over that crosswalk 3 times. I missed it. That's a good thing. So as a motorist, it was not a distraction to me. There definitely are cases where people, and I've actually witnessed this myself, people will stand in the middle of a crosswalk and take selfies. They need their Instagram on this nice, colorful crosswalk. So pedestrians have been hit by cars because of it. Uh, Pedestrians will sue. They will sue the city on what's called an attractive nuisance. They created something that was an attraction that becomes a nuisance for everybody. So that becomes definitely a problem when that happens. So there are definitely reasons. Um, Also, you may have heard in the news that the Federal Highway Administration, the U.S. Department of Transportation, is cracking down on street art as a whole because it is violation. It's actually costing people their federal funds. But at the same time, some people have actually marked crosswalks properly. They went vigilante and did it. This is actually happening out in Los Angeles this past week. Some people got upset that they did a complete streets initiative and did not put in crosswalk lines. And they did this complete streets initiative to make it safer for pedestrians. I actually know somebody who lives right next to this intersection. I mean, they're at the corner. But they never marked out the crosswalks. So people went out with house paint, which, I guess it can work somewhat in Los Angeles because it doesn't rain all too much. But that becomes a problem. It didn't I think it was Friday. They actually now put in permanent crosswalk markings. But here's a case of complete streets not going complete. They didn't take into it because they were trying to solve a pedestrian problem and actually may have made it worse. So you can see here what you can do for crosswalk markings. Overall here, these are the what's considered or the approved crosswalk markings. This has changed from the previous MUTCD. There used to be some with more diagonal lines. Those are gone and dash lines. So the basic one is just 2 white lines. What they call the longitudinal bar, many people call the continental bar. These work really well for people with low vision. They also have the advantage they last a lot longer um, because cars technically are supposed to track between the markings themselves so they don't wear it out. Also, I'd highly suggest that you microplane any surface you place these on if you're using like a thermoplast or epoxy. This way you can recess it so it's flat with the surface so your snow plows don't catch it. You can actually increase the lifespan by 50% by doing that. Perpendicular, or a lot of people call it ladder, those are actually highly visible. A lot of people that are low vision actually do like those because not only they can see the bars going across, they got an edge so they know where the edge is clearly. And double paired is just a way to help manage the car tires tracking between them. Materialistically, the main thing is generally we prefer a smooth surface, but when we do these nice things, it's something that's simulating brick. So these are simulations that they do permit, whether it's brick, stone, pavers, or grids in different colors, whether it's red, brown, tan, or clay. So basically depicting natural colors, but still providing a good contrast, but a subtle contrast with the white lines. So good again, but just keep in mind, like I said, federal highways cracking down on pavement markings at between or decorative pave color treatments. There is a section in MUTCD, I forget what section is, for aesthetics. It's probably a 3H. Yeah, because everybody looks under 3C for crosswalk marking, but there's a whole part on 3H on just aesthetic treatments for crosswalks. Now, I don't expect it in the near future, but they were going to have an option in the future. So I would say maybe 6 years from now, we might have the option with the longitudinal bars that the bars might be, each bar might be a different color. They might permit that in the distant future now. Normally, I would have expected that in about 3 years, 2 years from now. I'm sure that's delayed for at least 6. MUTCD is supposed to come on a 4-year cycle. Curb extensions, painted ones in particular. Now, curb extensions are a great thing people use during complete streets. It helps move parked cars away from the intersection. It creates nice short crossing points for pedestrians to cross the street because, in theory, a pedestrian can stand here and just walk across. So, in a case like this, might be about 6, 8 feet less crossing. So it's a lot easier to cross the street. However, it becomes a problem for people that are blind, low vision, or even some people that are in wheelchairs because they're not comfortable standing here. But for a blind person, they don't get the option. On the diagram on the right, you can actually see these little orange dots here, spots. That is basically where the clear, actually, it's about where the bottom of the curb ramp is, but they have a detectable warning surface still at the original curb. So somebody that's blind or low vision, their point is still at the curb, not at the painted extension. So for them, they still have the longer crossing because we don't have guidance. Also, when they get out here, so if they did know that there was a painted island here, curb extension, they wouldn't know where the edge is. So they wouldn't know where to stop. Also, they can't detect edges of paint. They can't detect the bollards. And this freaks people out sometimes. Even if you have something like bollards. I was in Manhattan on Friday night and I had to kill time. So I was on Zoom with some people I know in another country. And they're like, why are you walking in the street? I'm not, yeah, I'm walking in the street, but it's a protected pedestrian pathway on 7th Avenue. But to them, it looked like I was walking in the street. But so, because it was just these little plastic bollard things. But there were parts that had concrete barriers. So it does become confusing when you don't have it. But this is a great thing people use because it's a lot cheaper. Paint's a lot cheaper than concrete, especially if you're experimenting. So just be careful with this. I know New York City, Manhattan in particular, they've gotten a lot of trouble with this over the years because they were experimenting, especially like Times Square and Herald Square areas. And these are areas where they've actually closed off Broadway. Yes, that is a good question. A question pop up. There's also an issue of access to accessible pedestrian signals when the pole is not moved to the new curb. That is actually a big issue. I know one spot in particular in Boston, they were fighting over the color of the sidewalk. They never fought over the APS making any noise because this one actually, that APS worked well. But when they put the curb extension in, the button was now at this point a good 15 feet away. It was not usable by a person, basically by any pedestrian at that point. It was too far away from the crossing point. So, uh, painted curb extension. So ideally, we have physical curbs is what we like to have out there. Actually, if you look in any design book, it will say use a physical curb. Americans with Disabilities Act will also mention about using physical curbs as well. So you'll see that for that reason, so it's detectable. Like I said, a lot of people use the painted islands temporarily to see if it's usable. There might be some way to do that. Detectable warning. What do you mean by I got a question. Are there any guidelines on how detectable warnings should be replaced? They tend to fade away quickly. I'm assuming you're talking about the bumps as in truncated domes in that case. If you're talking about fading, because some people might use red, and the problem with a red detectable warning surface, where is it? I got one here in another room. Um, it's packed away for a trip next week. Truncated dome. If they if they're talking about the bumps themselves fading away, it might be the material. If you're using something as masonry brick, that will wear away very quickly. Masonry brick generally does not do well, especially if you have snow removal equipment, including a snow shovel. You would have to go with a more durable one. There are definitely some paving stone ones that will last about 12 years. That'll last with the equipment. But even after 12 years, you can still physically see the bumps, you just can't feel them. The way the detectable warnings work is that you can actually feel the bumps if you miss them with a white cane. Um, Cast iron, a lot of people are using cast iron. It is indestructible. That will outlast us. A lot of people also use heavy plastic ones. Those tend to last quite a long time. Nobody really truly knows the lifespan of those. Chances are you might be replacing the curb ramp by then. If it's a color issue, you can paint these. The detectable warnings can be painted. Just be careful that you put it in a surface that makes sure that it stays slip resistant. But with these curb extensions, it does create a good separation for pedestrians. It creates pathways so you know where the vehicle is, where the pedestrian is. It also gives you good alignment for uh, good alignment for the crosswalks themselves. So quite a few advantages using these curb extensions. And a lot of people do use this in complete streets to get curb extensions. Islands can be a different issue for many people. We also use a lot of islands. The advantage of a island in the middle of the road is that it can provide a refuge for pedestrians. So a lot of places are using this complete streets. You do have to be careful about the placement of these islands in complete streets. Now, the advantage of this, it gives pedestrians, they can go one direction, have a refuge in the middle, and then do the next one. So they don't have to have both directions clear at the same time. They can go in steps. There have been some issues in some cities that if you have these anywhere near an ambulance response or any emergency response route, it can prevent the ability for the emergency vehicles to get through. How does that happen? Well, if this island wasn't here, just say if a fire truck was coming down the street, cars would hopefully move off to the sides and then they can drive down the middle. Well, in this case, we've lost that maneuver. Also, sometimes these islands might be too close to an intersection, so a fire truck can't actually make the turn. So you can see how that can be a bit of a challenge. Maybe if an mountable curb on the end, it might be able to work. So there are things you have to take into account. Just be careful for these islands, especially if emergency equipment routes in certain areas, or if you're near a hospital, it can prevent the equipment from getting through if it's at the wrong spot. But other things we have to do is make sure also islands are big enough. In this case, this photo on the left, the crosswalk is not in the island. It's meant to be one giant crosswalk. But you know how pedestrians are. They was like, oops, I got 2 seconds. Oops, I only made it halfway. So in this case, they are now stacked up in the middle. They're not supposed to be, but that is something that has and does happen quite often. So if you know you're going to put an island in out there, just make sure you can put an island that's big enough. But to make sure that it's usable by people with disabilities. So the photo on the left, regular pedestrians can't squeeze in that little island, but somebody in a wheelchair, it's physically, even if there was cut through, it's not physically large enough. We need at least 6 feet in what's called length from the pedestrian standpoints, from a roadway design standpoint, 6 feet wide. That's because a wheelchair takes up about 5 feet of room. From the toe to the back of the push handle is about 5 feet, which just leaves them this much room, front and back, to squeeze in there. And you need an opening at least 5 feet wide. A lot of people go with 6 feet because most marked crosswalks are 6 feet. So you're just taking out a bottleneck. Just one of those nice little things, just make your cut through on the island the same width as your crosswalk does help quite a lot. Unless it's a really wide crosswalk, that's a different story. And always important that you place detectable warnings at each curb. But also, if you have an island that's at least 6 feet, so 6 feet this way, you need to have a detectable surface here and a detectable surface here with at least 2 feet between them. This just so that a person that's particular blind, so this is what's called the curb ramp conundrum. We put curb ramps in for people that are in wheelchairs or other mobility issues, but somebody that's blind actually can detect a curb. And when we make it a gradual slope, we remove that detectable surface. So we put these detectable warnings or truncated domes here so they can detect the edge. When they get across here, they hit this one, they now know they're about to step into the refuge. This clear spot. They hit this next one, tells them that they're about to cross into traffic again, and then this one tells them they're out of traffic. Now, if you're less than 6 feet, this gap becomes less than 2 feet. That's not detectable. And the one thing you don't want to do is put just one detectable warning surface there because somebody comes out here and they might stop, and they might stop in traffic. That's the one thing we don't want to do is have pedestrians stopped in traffic. This becomes definitely an issue for many places and when we're doing complete streets. Bike lanes are a key component of complete streets initiatives. Uh, but this can become a challenge for people that are blind or low vision. Also, a lot of this I know upsets a few people in the bicycle community. I ride a bicycle. Uh, and bike lanes are a great thing to have in these urban environments. Uh, but a lot of people on bicyclists, especially if it's in a more touristy area, don't follow the rules of the road, in particular stop signs, and that becomes a big, big issue. Because in this case, we have vehicle lane, we have a bike lane, and then we have a pedestrian crosswalk that's supposed to be here. Uh, so how is a pedestrian supposed to make it across? Now, just imagine if you're low vision. This is actually parking here. So this isn't supposed to be travel. But if you're blind or low vision, you might stop here. But how do you make it to technically here's our crossing point? Because this is not a drive lane. So it becomes very difficult to make this maneuver. And I'll show you some others where it looks perfect, but almost, but not quite. So this becomes a problem. So who stops, the bicyclist or the uh, motorist? And you see actually there's a pedestrian signal ahead here. I don't know why it's turned that way, but it always becomes a bit of a conflict out there. This language I've used on the second bullet point I got from somebody else says half-hearted bike lanes are a problem for both bicyclists and pedestrians, especially for pedestrians with vision disabilities. So that becomes a bit of an issue. Just keep in mind, we have people, pedestrians and bicyclists, speeds are different. There are definitely pedestrians that don't follow the rules themselves. Uh, and then we also have issues of bicyclists not following the rules. But when we get these conflicts like this, who actually has the way, and is it easy to negotiate for pedestrian, especially pedestrian disabilities, to cross not only the bike lane but over to where the crossing of the street is. So a lot of this is going to come down to education and enforcement issues. Enforcement does work. What exactly are Idaho stops? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that term. Now, this photo is actually in New York City, this particular one. I can tell you there definitely been some issues in New York City with even with islands. The islands might be too small to store pedestrians, so you have to clear parking lane, bike lane, then get to a little island. Bikes don't need to stop at stop signs, but yield. Oh, that I don't know. Uh, that ultimately is going to be up to the legislators to sort that one out. Uh, I can tell you they've had troubles in the past in Central Park in Manhattan. In the past, they've obviously done enforcement on that because traffic light would turn red, and there are no cars on these streets. It's just bicyclists. and pedestrians are trying to cross, and the bicyclists just try to mow down all the pedestrians. It actually, mow down is what actually happened. But now, when I was through there Friday, light turned red, the bicyclist stopped. Big difference, just a couple years. Tilley Street and Adams Street is definitely a big issue of that happening. Yeah, they got definitely a place like that happens, quite a few conflicts. So there are a lot of conflicts. That's why they say half-hearted bike lanes. Here's one that looks almost perfect. This might be near where you're talking about. This is in Brooklyn. Here we have good separation between cars and bicyclists. Here, the bicyclists have a protected bike lane. It's separated from the vehicle traffics. Pedestrians are separated. They're over here. So we have this beautiful separation between pedestrians, bicyclists, and motor vehicles. So it's a wonderful thing. But there's a conflict. So this is why we say can be conflicts between complete streets and ADA. Now, for a pedestrian to use this crosswalk here, they're over here. First of all, it is going to be difficult for them to find it, but where are they going to wait? Especially somebody in a wheelchair. They're going to be waiting here in the middle of the bike lane, even though it says yield. So the bicycle is supposed to yield. So they did that. But there's going to become a conflict when a pedestrian, especially a pedestrian that's uh, in a wheelchair, comes out here and they're going to be stopped in the bike lane. That can be an issue. Also, a blind person, they can't really find it. So they'll be still partially, they'll probably stand with a cane touching this surface and they might still be in that lane. So it becomes an issue. Or if you have a lot of pedestrians crossing, guess what? They're going to be clogging up this whole area. So almost ideal. When we get away from the intersection, I would say this is ideal with a perfect separation, two-way traffic. But just uh, try to keep this in mind. How to solve this? I would say first off, but I'm sure it's going to come with problems if you flip the bikes and the pedestrians, but then I can see a conflict in other spots. Yeah, the bike lane should be treated as a vehicle lane, and detectable warnings and detectable separations should be used. That's actually one thing they have not addressed in PROAG, public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. They have not addressed bike lanes as of yet. In the very distant future, yes, but it is not in the current one because when they started writing PROAG and when they did the most recent updates, bike lanes were reasonably new overall. But yeah, the official law is that bicycles have to yield to pedestrians and stop for pedestrians, but not everybody does it. I've seen that in a few places where you see like 5-foot stop signs on both sides of the bike paths because there's heavy pedestrian crossing and the bicyclists don't stop. Well, I would say almost every state law, bikes are considered a vehicle. I think it is every state that considers them a vehicle and they have to follow the vehicle rules. Shared streets. These are also a common thing people are using for complete streets. Shared streets are essentially a street that's got a very, very low volume of vehicles. But vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists all share the same space in the street, and there are no curbs present. There is an actual document by Federal Highways out there, accessible shared streets, that you can look up. It just talks about how people manage these things. So this can become a bit tricky for blind individuals. Um, uh, so if they needed to get out of the way, it can become an issue. Um, if a car is coming out, they don't know actually where there's a safe spot. So here we have the shared street. We also have dedicated sidewalks that pedestrians only can use. Looks nice, but you just have to make sure it is accessible. Things you can do. Since we don't have curbs, one thing you can use is unofficially used, but it's kind of one of those wink, wink, nod, nod types things. There is the ISO 23599. You can use this tactile strip like this. Do not use truncated domes. So this becomes a detectable edge. Truncated domes are specifically on curb ramps at crosswalks. So detectable warnings are specifically at the bottom of curb ramps or blended transitions at crosswalks. Now, this other surface technically hasn't been tested in the US. They're extremely common in Europe and in Asia. It's not lost on me, though, if you go to US Access Board's website and the PROAG page, they are showing this. So it's not lost on me, that particular item. But this does provide a good ability to create a trackable surface so somebody can actually follow it and it becomes a longitudinal surface. Other things you can do is have changes in slopes like this, but you just have to be careful. It can become a bit of a tripping hazard when you have these traversable, slightly traversable curbs. I know one place they wish they had not put mountable curbs, and that's at the Meadowlands Stadium. Uh, where the Jets and Giants play because they put them all over the place and pedestrians are crossing them and it's not easy to walk on and they're painted bright yellow for that reason because people keep tripping over it. Vertical curbs would have worked much better in that case. Parts that get rebuilt when they put the train station in have vertical curbs. But these are ways, or even a change in surface material. So these might be smooth concrete. This could have been something more textured that can provide some way of making it detectable. Pedestrian signals. Accessible pedestrian signals can be a great thing. This information here is actually based on a lawsuit that was against New York City Department of Transportation, which they were the losing end of this one. But one of the things that came up was what's called leading pedestrian interval or exclusive pedestrian interval, so LPI and EPI. So these were problematic without accessible pedestrian signals. So these are great things for moving pedestrians, but they don't work well without APSs for definitely with a blind and low vision. And let's say actually they help when you have sighted pedestrians, APSs in this situation. So on LPI, what it means is that the pedestrians have the opportunity to enter the crosswalk 3 to 7 seconds before the vehicles are given the green indication. So at this point, if you see the pedestrian signal go to walk, you can walk. Cars aren't moving. You don't have to worry about turning movements. So it has that advantage. But then what becomes the issue is a blind person doesn't know that change to walk. So they're losing the advantage of it. They're getting a shorter walk cycle for it. Also, what happens with LPIs, I've seen this happen quite a lot. What happens with pedestrians, the light's sitting there and says, don't walk, too much traffic. And then they start doing things like this or talking to their neighbors. And that light silently goes to walk. They don't see it. But the accessible pedestrian signal, if it makes a noise for the walk indication, they immediately wake up and walk. So they can actually move about 10% more pedestrians with an APS that's operating in that situation. Exclusive phase. This is where all traffic signals go red and pedestrians have exclusive access. And a lot of times we have the diagonal crossing or the barn dance, and that gives exclusiveness to it. But a person that is blind or low vision doesn't know that all cars are stopping and they can go each direction. I know one intersection that's about 2 miles from me that has exclusive. It only goes exclusive if a pedestrian presses the button. That's the key. You do have to press the button. But the message is all crossings have walk. So it does say that. Uh, Interesting. Good question there. Let me get this last bullet point and I'll get to that question. Without accessible pedestrian signals, blind and low vision pedestrians do not have don't have a queue on when to start crossing and don't have enough time to cross streets. I had a question, are there any options to call the pedestrian phase other than APS buttons for users who can't push the button? Yes, they are passive detectors. This is one that you can walk by and might detect it. Oh, and a lot of the new ones, you just wave your hand under the button area. So under the whole uh, assembly, you just wave your hand under it and it will detect it. You still need the whole assembly because that's where the speaker is and that's what vibrates. Vibrates are for people that are uh, um, deaf. So they can't hear it making a noise, but they can feel it vibrate for walk indication. This also helps some places if it's really loud and you can't hear the APS make a noise, you can feel it vibrate for walk. Uh, so that has the advantage that you can have it. There are passive ones you can. If a pedestrian walks by, it activates it automatically, or if you wave your hand in front of it, which are becoming much more popular. The wave hands. This started before COVID, but even since then, people are weary of pressing buttons. And people like waving their hands anyway. Um, this is what came up. This was actually from the lawsuit against New York City Department of Transportation. So here's just what it said in the language specifically. In addition to the risk that exists in general for persons crossing city streets without visual cues, initiatives to specifically configure certain New York City intersections and make them safer or for sighted pedestrians to cross have had the unintended effect of increasing confusion and danger for the blind. Problematic configurations include the LPI and the EPP. And for those more complex geometries, including as a result of medians and bike lanes that have been installed in recent years. So quite a few things came up in that particular lawsuit against the city DOT. City DOT knew this. They worked a lot to get ahead of this particular lawsuit. So they worked ahead. The only thing they didn't like was the timeline. Their numbers are astronomical. They probably have more traffic signals than the rest of the state combined. I mean, with pedestrian signals. So APSs, they provide a lot of useful information, audible and a vibratory tactile cues. So you can hear them. They vibrate for walk. If you put your hand on them, they have an arrow that also tells you where they are, but they need to be placed close to the crossing point so that they are usable by any pedestrian. So sometimes these get lost, especially during, as somebody mentioned in the question, when we have curb extensions, they get forgotten about because you don't want to move the poles. But they get moved, so now they're too far away to be useful for any pedestrian. Now it's time for a quiz. Of course, the general rule is we always need to have quizzes. We do these things to get the PDH credit.
So, Ted, are we ready for the poll questions?
Yes, we are.
All right, starting with the first one. Complete streets enable safe use and mobility of all users, including motor vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists. True or false? All right. About 99% of people are saying true. Next question. Blind and low vision pedestrians find it more difficult to cross streets with complete streets because of their complex geometry. True or false? Answers are pouring in. I'm gonna give it a few more seconds. So, Ted, it looks like we have 57% saying false and 43% saying true.
They have difficulties crossing. Yes, so blind and low vision pedestrians do find it difficult to cross streets uh, because of the more complex geometries. The thing that becomes the issue, if it's done right, they won't have a problem. Unfortunately, a lot of them haven't. Bike lanes can become tricky for many of them. Also, some complete streets that do other things like bike lane. You got the curb, bike lane, then a parking spot. And that becomes very difficult for them to negotiate those particular situations. Or if you have painted curb extensions, they don't know where the actual street edge is anymore. So those can become some conflicts.
All right, we are moving on to question 3. All pedestrians benefit from decorative crosswalks. Give it a few more seconds. And it looks like 93% are saying false.
That's correct. Yes. The key word was all pedestrians in this particular case. Now, you can have decorative crosswalks can help pedestrians as a whole because they can see where the crosswalk is. Motor vehicles can see the crosswalk because they're highlighted. But for people that are low vision, if it's a too decorative of a pattern, or if it's the wrong surface, I think it actually becomes a bigger problem. Soft surface material. It becomes a slip hazard. It also becomes very confusing to them. And they can't tell what the surface is. Elderly people also have troubles with these surfaces because even though it's perfectly smooth, it doesn't look smooth to them, and that even causes tripping.
All
And
right, last question. Adding what can help blind low vision pedestrians at LPI or EPP intersections? I'm giving it a few more seconds, let a little bit more people answer. All right, so it looks like 68% are saying accessible pedestrian signals and 32 are saying installing detectable warning surfaces.
in this case, because we're specifically talking about pedestrian signals with leading phase and exclusive phase, it's the APS. Detectable warning surface is always a good thing to have as long as it's placed at the right spot. We're just assuming that we already have the detectable warning surfaces in there. And nobody did the honking horn. That's a surprise. So that's it for the questions. Any last minute questions? If not, I'll turn it back over to David.
I think we're good. Thanks, Ted. No more questions I see. So with that, we will let everybody go. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week when we're actually going to talk about the MUTCD. So take care, everybody.